Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk a little bit about the fight card that happened yesterday of UFC 322. And once again, I do apologize to a certain amount of people for not posting as of much. There's just been so much going on within that of my personal life, so much stuff that I've really had to get together that, kind of as I've already explained within that of my most recent videos. I'm probably not going to be posting as consistently, probably until about mid December, maybe even early January. But I still will be posting, probably about once to maybe twice a week. It depends on, what time I have. And on top of that, what videos I find to be absolutely necessary. I'm trying to work kind of on a different format and different projects, but unfortunately, I just really don't have any time for that at the moment because there's just so much that I kind of have to do. But, it is what it is. Of course, I will be posting a certain amount of videos for that of next week because absolutely I have to talk about that big fight card that will be happening. I believe with that of David Benavidez versus Anthony Yard and Brian Norman Jr. versus Devin Haney, I will be doing my research and I will be posting a multitude of videos with that because that is a humongous fight card. And of course, that's one that I cannot miss. But of course, this fight card yesterday, for those of you that are UFC watchers or MMA fans, of course, that this was a very, very big card. And there was a lot of notable names on here, former champions, up and coming top contenders, and of course, the main event, which was debatably the most important fight of all, because this was a fight between not only two champions, but this was the opportunity for not only Jack Della Maddalena to defend his title to prove to the world that he is someone that is a legit champion and overall did not just have that one great performance over Bilal Muhammad. And that, Islam, of course, that he could prove that he could become a double champ, just like other great fighters of the past eras, like Conor McGregor, Daniel DC Cormier, that of Alex Pereira, and a multitude of others that I'm sure that I'm not mentioning, Ilia Topuria. So this was a very, very big deal. And of course, for those of you that did not end up hearing about the results, Islam Makhachev ended up winning the fight with flying colors, which is pretty much what I had predicted. And I'm going to go over that. But the question is now about Mr. Islam Makhachev. Where does he rank within that of the UFC's history? Because he has been severely dominant. Because Jack Della Maddalena, although to be honest with you, I was not that impressed with him. I always thought that he was a little bit overrated. And I thought that he was probably not even going to have one title defense for that weight class. But I mean, the thing is that Islam Makhachev that he does have victories over Charles Oliveira when he was at his peak. He does have victories over Alexander Volkanovski when he was somewhat at his peak, although he was moving up a weight division. He does have the win over Jack Della Maddalena at his peak. And he also does have a win over Dustin Poirier when he wasn't really at his peak, but still at a decent point in his career, kind of on his last legs, but probably still a fighter that gave a decent performance. So Islam Makhachev definitely has one hell of a resume, especially at the current moment in time. And now that he is a two-weight division champion and as dominant as what he has been, the question is about Islam Makhachev is that does he deserve to be in the quote-unquote GOAT conversation? And we're going to talk about it because I thought that it was very, very particularly interesting. But let's get into it. I'm going to talk about some of the other fighters on here as well as Mr. Jack Della Maddalena. This video is going to be by VictorMMA, who, interestingly enough, predicted that Jack Della Maddalena would win this fight and that he thought that the fight would not even be close, which left me a little bit confused because I was really surprised that, a certain amount of people actually picked Jack Della Maddalena because, in my personal view, he's just not that great of a fighter. But, I mean, I'll explain that as it goes along. But that being stated, let's get into it. Let's see what the man has to say.
Islam Makhachev just dominated JDM for 5 straight rounds to become the welterweight champion. And honestly, this was a almost Hamzat Chimaev level performance. JDM had pretty much nothing to offer throughout this fight. And I think it's time we talk about Islam Makhachev being the greatest of all time in the sport. But first, let's cover the fight. From the moment the bell...
Just to talk about Islam Makhachev, if he is debatably the greatest of all time in the UFC's history, I'm not 100% sure if I would rank him as my complete GOAT. I think that he's someone that is getting there. I think that he's, within the top 30, top 20, top 10 all-time range. He may even be classed, above Khabib Nurmagomedov. Someone that I would probably say was more dominant and more skilled on the ground than him, but someone overall that, of course, has improved not only his ground game, but also his striking, probably to a greater degree than what Khabib Nurmagomedov ever had. and someone overall that, of course, probably has a better resume, not only because he fought certain fighters at their peak a little bit more than Khabib Nurmagomedov did, but on top of that, also he was just around in the sport for a little bit longer, at least in terms for his titleship, his title reign. Khabib Nurmagomedov, unfortunately, he was a great, great fighter. He was probably the most dominant fighter that I've ever seen, but, at least for a UFC fighter. But the thing is that he just really was not around long enough to really prove that he would be, in my view, the complete GOAT, for the sport. But, I mean, it is what it is. But people ask me, they say, who do you think is personally the greatest, of all time in the MMA or within that of the UFC's history? And in my view, of course, you have guys like Anderson Silva, who deserves to be in that conversation. You have George St. Pierre. You also have John Jones. Now, John Jones, of course, there always is going to be a little bit of a black X in his career because he's been caught on steroids several times. And on top of that, anyone who also knows me knows that I'm a little bit of a stickler for fighters that, I find to be quote unquote weight bullies. And John Jones, although he is an all time grade level fighter, he's someone, in my personal view, that was successful to a certain degree, not only because of his skill set, but also because a lot of the fighters that he was fighting during his era in the beginning, like Shogun Rua and Rampage Jackson and Lyoto Machida and Rashad Evans, those guys would probably not be light heavyweight fighters today. They were light heavyweight fighters, 15 years ago, maybe just after the Chuck Liddell era and certain things like that, but they would not really be light heavyweights today. Light heavyweights are guys like Yuri Prohashka and Alex Pereira and certain things like that. Like, I know that certain people, when they take a look, for example, for Rocky Marciano, a lot of people take a look at Rocky Marciano and say that a lot of the fighters that he fought were older or that they were smaller. Well, actually, the truth is about Rocky Marciano is that he was almost smaller than every single elite fighter that he ever fought. Rocky Marciano was only about 5'10" with about a 67-inch arm reach, and he only weighed in at about 185 pounds at max. So when you talk about his fights against guys like Ezra Charles and Jersey Joe Walcott and Archie Moore, to be honest with you, all those guys were either the same size as him or actually a decent amount bigger than him. When you talk about Jersey Joe Walcott was a decent amount bigger than Rocky. You can even see it in the fight. But the thing is about John Jones is that narrative kind of pertains more to him because he's a guy that's around 6'4" to 6'5" with about an 84-inch arm reach, and he's a guy that you could argue could even fight at heavyweight or probably is a light heavyweight, for today's standards. But during his era, he was not around during the era of the Yuri Prohashkas or the Alex Pereiras or, the Ankalaevs or anything like that. Now, don't get it twisted. Am I claiming that John Jones, would not have beat those guys? That's not what I'm claiming. But I do think that John Jones was a little bit of a benefactor of being in a little bit of a smaller era, just in my personal view. But that being stated, with what he's accomplished and also with some of the bigger fighters that he has been able to defeat, like that of a Dominic Reyes and excuse me, I almost said Alex Pereira and Alexander Gustafsson and certain other guys like that, he still has a great debate for being the greatest fighter of all time. Those are probably the three fighters that I would debate have the greatest argument for being the greatest. And after that, you have certain guys that are within the top 10, the top 20. You have guys like Chuck Liddell, probably a Matt Hughes, Dominic Cruz, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. I'm trying to think of who else might be up there. Alexander Volkanovski, Jose Aldo, of course, if I'm forgetting him. There might be some other ones that I'm forgetting. Alex Pereira, perhaps. Some other guys that, I'm sure I'm forgetting. Anyway.
Rank. JDM was trying to establish the range with the jab, and that greatly helped out Islam Makhachev because of one factor, which was the low kick. Islam Makhachev absolutely hammered JDM early with these low kicks that just chopped his leg. I mean, they damaged his leg badly, and it really only took maybe 8 low kicks. Islam Makhachev at 170 seems to have way more power. The cardio was not a factor because of the fact that he was on top the entire time in a dominant position. Early in the fight,
let me just explain overall what my fight prediction was for this fight. I did not think that this fight was going to be competitive whatsoever. Jack de la Maddalena, according to my calculations, he was never really the most talented fighter in the first place. I think that he fought a Bilal Muhammad that, first of all, was someone that has always really had his faults within his own style anyways. And I think that Bilal Muhammad kind of fought the wrong type of fight. And by the time that he really tried to take Jack de la Maddalena down, he kind of had, his game plan down, and had a lot of the momentum on his side. I think that if Bilal Muhammad, if he would have maybe started to, try the ground game a little bit earlier within that fight and not try so much on his striking to prove that he had quote unquote Canelo type of hands, by his own words, then I think that there's a possibility that he could have won that fight. But I think that he, perhaps maybe underestimated Jack Della Maddalena's striking to a certain degree. And I think that it caused him the fight. Jack Della Maddalena, when we take a look at his career, there's just nothing about him, in my personal view, that is exceptional. Now, he was 9-0 in the UFC, but when you really take a look at a lot of those fighters that he defeated, you wouldn't really remember a certain amount of those fighters. A lot of those guys are not really super great top contenders, and the two best wins that he had before that Bilal Muhammad fight, they weren't really the most impressive of wins. I believe that he ended up getting a split decision victory over Kevin Holland, which pretty much, excuse me, is self-explanatory in itself. Because if you're a guy that really should be a champion, or at least a long-reigning champion, you shouldn't be getting a split decision over someone like a Kevin Holland. And then, in his next fight against a damn near, 38 years old Gilbert Burns. Now, apparently, Jack Della Maddalena had broke his arm in that fight early in the fight, so I'll give him a little bit of a break if that is the case, and I assume that it is. But that being stated, if we take a look at Jack Della Maddalena's performance there, it was very obvious that, he was not someone that had this excellent takedown defense. And to be honest, like he was being, touted as this guy overall that had this great takedown defense and this guy that is such a great boxer and blah 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 and all sort of stuff. He's a good boxer for a UFC fighter, but he's not exceptional. He's not someone that I would label as a a peak version of Dustin Poirier or someone overall like that of a Volkanovski or someone like that of a Topuria. He's not someone overall that has the boxing ability of those guys. People also rant and rave about how he throws in combination, but he doesn't throw in combination anywhere near as much as what he needs to, which is a part of the reason why Islam was able to take charge because Jack Della Maddalena at times was just throwing too much of single shots. He'll throw a combination for anyone that pays attention to his fights. He'll throw in combination, overall if you allow him to, if you stay a little bit too stagnant. But if you're actually consistent with your offense, he does overall once again become a little bit too stagnant. He does become a little bit too, kind of frozen out there. And he does not throw enough offense. It is what it is. And then on top of that, his takedown defense is extremely overrated. Anyone can see this against both Kevin Holland and also that of Gilbert Burns. And they pretty much showed up in this fight.
Makhachev secured a single leg takedown on JDM and stayed on top. JDM had pretty much nothing to offer.
And this is in no way, by the way, me trying to degrade Islam Makhachev's win. I think that this still is a great win as the man was a champion. But I was just surprised at actually how many people were actually picking Jack Della Maddalena because there was just nothing about this guy that really ever impressed me that much. I never took a look at this guy and said, wow, like he's real championship level material. Jack Della Maddalena is someone that, in my view, at best, is someone like a Jamal Hall Hill or a Sean Strickland, someone that had the title for, maybe one or two fights because they ended up getting the perfect opportunity or the perfect style matchup or had that one great night. And then when they finally fought a fighter that really took them seriously, when they were actually championship level, they were never going to win again. And to be quite honest with you, I'm not even sure if Jack Della Maddalena would beat a certain amount of the top contenders that we see at 170. I don't know if he would beat Carlos Prates. I don't know if he would beat a Sean Brady. I don't know if he would beat a Michael Morales. To be quite honest with you, I would probably favor, overall 2 out of 3 of those fighters against him. I mean, it just is what it is.
Bilal Muhammad, he was able to defend the takedowns easier, but he was also able to get up from the bottom easier. Makhachev really just showed levels. He showed that when it comes to Bilal, he's nothing like Bilal on the ground. He has
Well, Islam Makhachev isn't, not only is he better on the ground overall than that of a Bilal Muhammad, but he's someone overall that in terms of striking, he also has massively improved it. Now, I'm not going to claim 100% for sure that he's better than Bilal on the hands because Bilal actually did surprise me quite a bit against Leon Edwards. But that being stated, Islam Makhachev, even in terms of striking, he can hold his own even against very good strikers. I've seen it against Alexander Volkanovski, and I've seen it against some other guys. Now, of course, Islam's striking at times looks a little bit better than probably what it actually is because they're so worried about his ground game and his wrestling, which creates holes and openings for certain guys to be taken down because they're not attacking in the same type of way that they usually would. But the thing is that Islam has still very much held his own in the striking category. And other than probably one moment in this fight, Islam was also outstriking that of a Jack Della Maddalena, which is something that I was not surprised at all because, to be honest with you, I think that Islam could have even stayed on the feet and possibly even outstruck him. I'm sorry, but Jack Della Maddalena, there's just nothing in my personal view that is exceptional about him. He does not have exceptional boxing. He does not have exceptional ground game at all. He's someone overall that, to be quite honest with you, the only exceptional area that he has is power. That's really about it. Just my personal view of it.
more control, and JDM had pretty much no way of getting back up to his feet. And going throughout the rounds, there was brief striking, and honestly, I would say Makhachev got the better of the striking. I
As would I.
think he landed more damage. JDM might have landed more punches to the head. I'm not sure what the exact stats are, but for sure he landed more damage because of that low kick. The absolute domination on the ground combined with the damage from the low kick wore down JDM to a level we've never seen JDM. And it was surprising because the great cardio we saw that he had against Bilal was just not there. And kind of
Well, the cardio, in my personal view, really wasn't the problem. The problem was is that he had no ground, defense overall for that of an Islam. And his takedown defense and his ground game defense is relatively good, as Islam, of course, wasn't able to submit him. But pretty much anyone, once again, that took a look at his fights against Gilbert Burns and Kevin Holland knew that his takedown defense wasn't extraordinary. It's very good, but in order to survive against someone like an Islam, no.
similar to Hamza versus DDP, it was because he was stuck on bottom, getting completely smothered, and it just zapped the energy literally from round one. From round one, JDM was getting smothered by Makhachev, and after that, you could just see the punches of JDM being way less effective. I mean, his
Not only that, but when fighters overall end up getting taken to the ground a multitude of times, they start to throw a little bit less because they're so afraid of that takedown that they start to become almost too patient and they start to, kind of overall just stay in the background a little bit too much because they're trying to land certain strikes while also not getting taken down. And that sounds great on the surface, but a wrestler wants you to be more patient because the more patient that you are, when it comes down to it, once again, the more opportunity they might have to possibly take you down or to mess your game up. That's why overall, usually when strikers have actually been successful against that of wrestlers, they've been consistent in their strikes, like what a Leon Edwards was against Kamaru Usman and that of a Colby Covington. You also have to go for their legs. Because if you want to wear down a wrestler, you have to go for their legs because a lot of their power from the wrestling comes from the lower part of their body. Of course, the upper half as well, but their legs, of course, are a big part of it. And Jack Della Maddalena, he just was not able to do anything really to keep Islam off of him. But anyway, and sometimes don't get it wrong. Sometimes being more patient will also mix up a wrestler because then they'll try to go for the takedown, and if you're also very patient, it might confuse them a little bit more. But you have to mix volume with patience. And Jack Della Maddalena, and too many fighters, when they get in a wrestling situation, they just become way too stagnant and way too patient. And you can't do that with a wrestler because a wrestler overall, once again, like it is a Makhachev, he's just going to wait overall for the right opportunity. And if you're throwing the least amount of strikes, then he doesn't have to worry as much about certain things, and you're not creating any desperation. So he needed to go for his legs. He needed to try to strike a little bit more, but he basically just was not able to do anything.
jab looked labored going into the second round. And that was all because of the first round of just the pressure Islam Makhachev had. And because of that, Makhachev was not gassing out at all. Going up to 170, a big narrative was, I talked about it. Is Makhachev going to get tired quicker? And I thought so because I thought JDM would be able to defend takedowns and scramble more. But
If Islam overall was fighting a guy that I thought was going to able to defend his takedowns consistently, then maybe I would have worried about it. And Islam has very good stamina, but it's not amazing. We have seen that, it's not quite on the level of, say, Habib Nurmagomedov or, say, a Max Holloway or something like that, because he does tire out a little bit in certain fights. We've seen it a little bit against Dustin Poirier. We definitely seen it against Alexander Volkanovski in the first fight. I believe that we also seen it in another fight as well. But the thing is that he does still have very good stamina. And when you have a wrestler that is able to keep that opponent down and have top position, they really don't tire out at least that much because, it makes the opponent expend a lot of energy to constantly fight it off. And then overall being in the top position, of course, is in an easier position than standing on the feet the whole entire time, moving in and out. But anyway.
because of the fact that he was on top so dominantly, he didn't have to exert a lot of energy. Similar to how we saw Hamzat Chimaev versus DDP. And JDM was pretty much fighting off submission after submission, which he did well, and obviously he prepared for going into this fight. But what he didn't prepare for enough, or just didn't know how to do, was get up from Islam Makhachev. He seemed hesitant to try to go for Islam Makhachev's legs and wrestle up that way.
Agreed.
Probably because of the Darce choke, but he couldn't get a knee frame at all. And I think that's because of Makhachev's pressure on top. And in terms of the boxing, I think JDM might have landed a little bit more significant punches to the body and head. But the problem was that in these very brief scrambles, Makhachev would end up in a clinch position and able to just take him down from close range. And all of that led to pretty much a just absolute domination and Makhachev becoming a double champion, which begs the question, who is next for Islam Makhachev and who can beat Islam Makhachev from the...
That is a great question. Because to be quite honest with you, there's really not a whole lot of fighters that I would really favor over Islam Makhachev. To be quite honest with you, the only fighter that I would really give a major chance over him would be that of an Ilia Topuria. That's really about it. And even then, I'm not quite sure if I would favor Ilia because he's someone where I don't know how great his wrestling is. Now, apparently he does have a background in Greco-Roman wrestling, which I'm sure will help him quite a bit. But I've also never seen him against a fighter that, has top-level Sambo wrestling. And he did seem a little bit hesitant to face that one Armenian fighter, Arman Sarukian. Now, of course, Islam also seemed a little bit hesitant to fight Ilia Topuria, so we'll see what ends up happening there. But that's pretty much the only fighter that I would give a major chance to actually beat him. Now, of course, there are some fighters at the 170-pound weight class that do have a chance. Carlos Prates, perhaps, and Michael Morales and some of those other guys. But I don't know if they're going to be good enough. I need to watch more of Michael Morales. He surprised me a little bit as of yesterday. I believe that I had only watched one fight of him before, so I thought that Sean Brady, that his wrestling was going to be a bit too much, and he surprised me. His striking and, overall his takedown defense was better than what I even thought that it originally was. So it turns out that I needed to watch a little bit more of him. But we'll see overall once again what ends up happening there. It should be very particularly interesting. I've heard also rumors about a potential Islam versus Kamaru Usman fight. That would be a great fight. I would have to favor that of an Islam just because not only he is a great fighter, but Kamaru Usman, although he's still very dangerous, he's just not quite the same fighter that he once was. You can tell that he's slowed down by at least a level or two. So we'll see what ends up happening. But in terms of fighters moving up from 145 to 145 to 155, to be honest with you, the only fighter that I would even give close to a 50-50 level chance is that of an Ilia Topuria. Kamaru Usman, I think, has a chance, and maybe a Michael Morales, but Michael Morales, he's someone that I need to watch a little bit more to really confirm how much of a chance that I would really give him. And as for that of a Kamaru Usman, he's a great fighter, but I think that his best days are behind him, at least in terms of his absolute best days. And I think in order to beat this version of an Islam Makhachev, you are going to have to be on one of your absolute best days or in your peak form. So we'll see what ends up happening. But that'll be very interesting.
Looks of it at welterweight, it kind of seems like pretty much nobody. I mean, the only person to beat Makhachev is if somebody can land a knockout and get really lucky. Kamaru Usman's talking about it, but
Well, also, if you can handle his wrestling, you have a great chance as well. We've seen success with Islam overall in the past with Alexander Volkanovski. Now, of course, Islam was able to still pull out that fight, but the point is that there are fighters, in my view, that may be able to potentially beat him. The problem is that you're going to have to be able to someone handle the wrestling. And the majority of fighters overall, they're just not able to handle that Sambo-style wrestling. Ever since it's really been introduced by Khabib Nurmagomedov and some of these other guys, they've just not really been able to handle it. It's almost kind of like what Royce Gracie was, back, I believe in the late 90s and early 2000s with the UFC. People were not able to handle Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because they had no idea about it. These guys were, karate, and they were Brazilian, and they were, Muay Thai, not Muay Thai probably, not back then. But they were, other things like, karate, taekwondo, wrestling. And then once they ran into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was pretty much a cultural shock. So I think that fighters are eventually going to have to learn, high-level wrestling. Otherwise, overall, once again, it's going to create, a domination effect, for the Sambo wrestlers, for quite a while. But we'll see.
came off of kind of a mid performance against Buckley. That would be a little bit more of an interesting fight because of the grappling of Usman. It'd probably be on the feet, but I think Makhachev will win that on the feet. We saw a great win from Carlos Prates, but Carlos Prates, I mean, I think the same thing would happen to him on the ground. And I think probably the same thing to Michael Morales, who is also on this card, who got a finish over Sean Brady. They both have great performances, but in terms of the grappling, I just think Makhachev will dominate them.
I would need to see how good Michael Morales actually is. But in terms of Carlos Prates, I agree. I think that Islam more than likely would get him. Carlos Prates is always dangerous because he's, decently technical. He's someone that can be losing, a few rounds and get you with that last shot. Which is why I predicted him to beat that of a Leon Edwards, because Edwards, I think his best days are behind him. And on top of that, and I will say this, Edwards actually surprised me a little bit with his boxing. From what I've seen with his boxing in the previous years, he appears to use a little bit more of his legs, and his boxing can be a little bit stale and not as mixed up as what it needs to. But, he actually proved to me that he's a very, good boxer when he needs to be. But unfortunately, just like I also had predicted, at least with that particular fight, Carlos Prates was eventually more than likely going to catch him with something, which is exactly what happened. And Edwards is someone that does have a little bit more wear and tear on him, but he did have a great performance for as long as the fight lasted.
Even more so than JD.
But Carlos Prates is someone that does not throw enough in my personal view, does not have good enough takedown defense. The only shot that he would really have against Islam is to land that shot. And of course, if anyone can do it, it'd be him. But, overall, you can't really have the Deontay Wilder type of game plan to usually win a fight.
Yeah, which leaves Bilal Muhammad and Ian Gary, who are fighting. I'm predicting Ian Gary to win that fight against Bilal. If he fights Islam Makhachev, honestly, I think Ian Gary gives Makhachev the toughest test. I know there's talk about Shavkat.
That's very possible, because Ian Gary is someone that, he's not someone that I would claim as an A+ skilled level fighter, but he is very talented. He is also very big. Now, if Shavkat Ramonov, if he's still there at that weight class, I would probably say that he clearly has the best chance to beat Islam. But I don't know where he's been as of lately. He pretty much has been AWOL. So I would need to see where he's going.
Probably won't get the next title shot because he's been out for so long. I think Shavkat would get dominated on the ground as well. Ian Gary had his moments.
That would be pretty much the only fight that I would love to see. And from what I heard, Shavkat Ramonov against Ian Gary, although he ended up winning that fight from what I remember, if that was the fight that I'm remembering correctly anyway, Shavkat was not anywhere near as impressive in that fight as what he needed to be. So we'll see.
Shavkat, I think Makhachev would dominate Shavkat on the ground. I think Ian Gary's the one who has the best chance. Am I picking him to beat Makhachev? Probably not. But I think if there's one
I think that Ramonov still would have the best chance.
Person who has the best chance at welterweight, it's Ian Gary. And then there's that one final fight, and we all know what it is. It's Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev. Now, I'm going to be honest, at 170, if Ilia Topuria comes up, I cannot pick him against Makhachev.
I would agree with that. I just think that Ilia Topuria, excuse me. Now, of course, just because overall a fighter moves up in weight and they're not naturally that weight doesn't always mean that they're going to lose. Just take a look at Crawford versus Canelo. But that being stated, Ilia is someone like when we take a look at Crawford Canelo, for example, those fighters are somewhat comparable in size. Ilia against Islam, like you could debate that Islam is bigger by about a weight class and a half. Ilia is someone that really belongs more at 145, but because he is so talented and on top of that such a great athlete and so skilled, he really has to compete at higher weight classes because no one really stands a chance if they're even close to his size.
I just can't. Makhachev looks great at this weight, and that's just too big of a size for Topuria. At 150...
I would agree, but what I will state is this. If Ilia can handle the wrestling, there's no way in my personal view that Islam would win that fight. Ilia is just too technical of a striker, too good of a boxer. I think he's even a better boxer than what that of an Alexander Volkanovski is. He has better head movement. He's someone overall that knows how to move off the center line and use angles. He also has terrific hand-to-hand combat defense. So if Ilia was actually able to, if he was actually able to keep himself off of the ground, I would 100% favor him in that fight. But I just don't know if that's going to be able to happen.
D5 though, I think I might lean a little bit more towards Islam Makhachev after this, but it's a way different fight. I think I'm close to 50-50 on that. I think that's the fight to make. That's the real tough.
I would probably favor Islam Makhachev 60-40. but I would also need to see Ilya against a type of wrestler. That's why I would love to see Ilya against Arman Sarukian. But I think that he's a little bit tentative to take that fight, not only because he has a very tough wrestling style, but he's also not someone that would be quote unquote box office. And if you lose to someone like an Arman, it could ruin a little bit of your marketability and your image. So if you're going to fight a big time wrestler, why not just go straight for the big fish in Islam? So I understand, but it might behoove him to actually face someone like an Arman to get that wrestling down first. But we'll see.
Test, the biggest fight for Islam Makhachev. I think that's the fight to make at the White House. Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria at 155. But who knows? I don't know if Islam Makhachev's going to want to go back down to 155 after having such an easy performance at welterweight and an easy weight cut. I think the money's probably going to have to be right for that one.
Ilya said, "You're the most boring thing in this game. Every day I'm more certain I put you to sleep." And this guy, he also said, Jack needs an entire camp dedicated to just wrestling. What a disappointment of a champion. And listen, I kind of agree with that, and I'm not trying to be harsh. But, the reason why I'm not disappointed is because I never seen Jack de la Maddalena as that good in the first place. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, certain people were saying that he defended very well and all sort of stuff. He defended the submissions very well, but let's also be real. Islam had probably the most amount of control time that I've ever seen for a championship level fight, especially for moving up in weight. Like, come on, man. Like, 18 minutes of control time. It's absolutely pathetic.
But that's what all the fans want to see. But all the other fights on this card were pretty good except for the co-main event. Bo Nickel had an insane head kick knockout. He looks a lot better on the feet. He looks improved since his Reiner de Ritter fight. Benoit Saint Denis gets a massive KO over Beneil Dariush early in the fight, 18 seconds. Carlos Prates got that insane KO over Leon Edwards. They might push him for a shot against Islam, who knows? And so did Michael Morales. He had a great performance, finished Sean Brady in this first round. But this is probably the most impressive performance of this year. I think it's more impressive than the Hamzat over DDP because, listen, DDP...
I'm not going to go with that. And the reason why I'm not going to go with that is because DDP, in my view, he's actually someone that is a legit champion. He's someone overall that got wins over Sean Strickland, Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker. Like, he's someone that when you take a look at him, he's very awkward and he doesn't always check every box in terms of technical, ability. But he's someone that is a legit, like, very talented champion. Everyone pretty much knew, at least a lot of people that really knew what they were watching, everyone pretty much knew that JDM or Jack de la Maddalena, he was not going to last at the top for long.
I predicted Hamzat to win that fight, and it was simply because I knew DDP's takedown defense was just not good, and his wrestling in general is just not good, and he's a guy that relies on physicality. I predicted JDM to win this fight because I knew how...
I'm just gonna go out on a limb here, just my personal view of it. Dricus's takedown defense, in my view, is a lot better than JDM's. Just my personal view.
Good JDM is. I knew how good his striking is. I knew how good his takedown defense and get-ups are. But where I went wrong was underestimating Islam Makhachev. He made a fighter as good as JDM look easy. I'm going to be honest.
Because to be quite honest with you, JDM is just not that good. JDM is someone that, once again, anyone that's seen this fight against Gilbert Burns and Kevin Holland knew how this fight was basically going to go. He's just not that good. And I'm not claiming overall that, once again, that Islam did not get a great win. This still is an A-grade level win. But Jack de la Maddalena, just my view of it, I could be wrong. We'll see in his future fights. But just in my view, he's probably one of the weakest champions I've ever seen.
I think Islam Makhachev is the greatest of all time. Things may change in the future. They will change in the future. But for right now, I think Islam Makhachev has passed John Jones as greatest of all time, has passed...
Not 100% sure if I would claim that because I don't know if he has enough on his resume. But he is someone that is getting there.
George St. Pierre is greatest of all time. And I think it's a pretty easy argument. I may make another video about that, but right now, Islam...
Well, I don't really know how it could be a quote-unquote easy argument when you have guys like John Jones and Silva and George St. Pierre that have not only a bunch of title defenses, but you're talking about George St. Pierre who beat Matt Hughes, BJ Penn, Johnny Hendricks, some of the greatest champions ever, not to even mention some of the other guys like Carlos Condit and, some other guys that I'm not even mentioning. Then you have John Jones, who is also a two-way division champion, beat guys like Rampage, Rashada, although to be fair, those guys were clearly undersized against him, but it is what it is, overall. And then on top of that, also beat guys like Dominic Reyes and Cyril Gane, blah, 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 whatever else, and then, of course, when you talk about Silva, talking about a guy that defeated Vitor Belfort, Forrest Griffin, I believe Rich Franklin, some other guys like that, so... No, I don't think that it's appropriate to say that he's clearly the greatest of all time as of yet, but he's definitely getting there.
Makhachev had one of the best double champ performances we've ever seen, and
against one of the weakest champions in the UFC's history ever. And that's just the truth of the matter. No offense, but his 9-0 record in the UFC, excuse me, his 9-0 record in the UFC, it's one of the weakest 9-0 records. He barely got the victory over a Kevin Holland. He really was losing that fight to Gilbert Burns before the knee. And then he got that great win over Bilal Muhammad, but the rest of the guys that he fought, they were basically bums. There's no offense.
of the best welterweights, one of the most skilled fighters in the UFC. This performance
No, he's not. I'm sorry. Jack Della Maddalena is not. He's not a guy, in my personal view, that is really top tier in terms of true pound for pound potential. I mean, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. Like I said, I think that he had that one great win over Bilal Muhammad. Do I think that he would beat Michael Morales? No. Do I think that he would defeat some of the other guys there? No. To be honest, he pretty much had the easiest, path line to that title. I mean, he didn't even face anyone like Ian Gary. He didn't even face anyone like Sean Brady or Michael Morales. Like he fought an older Gilbert Burns and Kevin Holland, and he like immediately got to the title. Like, give me a break.
doesn't show how bad JDM is. It shows how good Islam Makhachev is. He had his toughest fight in his entire career, and it was one of his most
This definitely was not the toughest fight of his career. Sorry, but Alexander Volkanovski was a lot tougher than this. I'm sorry.
dominant performances. Let me know what you guys think about this fight. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like, comment.
And I know that certain people overall will say, well, he's talking about, overall heading into the fight, how it looked, right? But a lot of people really didn't take a look at this fight as the toughest fight of his career. Give me a break. Alexander Volkanovski was looked at as a lot tougher. So was Charles Oliveira. Pretty much anyone that knew what they were talking about in this fight knew that Jack Della Maddalena, he was just not that good.
And subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.
Power just cut out.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Congratulations to Mr. Islam Makhachev. And that pretty much is about it. But, once again, overall, do I believe that Jack Della Maddalena is that good? No, personally, I do not. But, it is what it is. But congratulations overall to him. He still was a relatively great fighter. And Islam, of course, has his other wins against guys like Volkanovski and Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, and some other ones as well. So he deserves a lot of credit. But that pretty much is about it for today. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to y'all later, and we'll see where this goes.